is yet to be heard. Shrutam means what is heard. Shrutavyam need not be taken as what is worth hearing and all. You see, everything can be divided like this. There are certain things which we have seen, and there are certain other things which we are yet to see. The seen and yet to be seen. The heard and yet to be heard about. A lot of pleasure. This is called exposure. First we hear of something, then we see something. The same thing. What we hear about, we want to see. And once we see it, then we develop a desire. Then once we develop a desire, then we undertake an action. Then we want to achieve it. Then this is this is the main central preoccupation of an individual. He hears of something and wants to, or he sees something, he hears of something, he sees something. This is called exposure. Exposure brings about a desire. Exposure, in fact, brings about a dormant desire is made explicit through exposure. Doesn't create a desire. Desire is there in the heart. It's like temptation, you see. You have temptation for things. When you go to Khan market, you feel tempted for things. That doesn't mean before you went to Khan market there were no temptation. Aisi baat nahi. Temptations are always there in a dormant form, and those dormant desires become manifest, explicit in your mind. I can use a different language. In fact, the dormant desires get aggravated. They are made to manifest, they are brought out, and they are given an expression, and they are aggravated. Exposure aggravates desire. I don't say exposure creates a desire. Literally speaking, no desire is created. Every desire is there in the unmanifest state. It just manifests. It just manifests. Desires become manifest. Therefore, exposure, whenever you go to America, then suddenly, the dormant desires become like, even though you are a vegetarian here, then that, what is being a vegetarian? Vegetarian simply means, there is a certain resistance. You resist the temptation for the non-vegetarian. It's not an effortless thing. It looks effortless because there is always a temptation for the non-vegetarian. You want to break. You may dislike the non-vegetarian, but it is your maturity that is preventing you from being non-vegetarian. It is your self-control that is preventing you from becoming a non-vegetarian. It is your sanskara. There is an effort not to be a non-vegetarian. Therefore, but then when you go to America, then there is exposure. Everybody is a non-vegetarian there. You go to any restaurant, everything is really, there is no vegetarian. The only vegetarian that is available in American restaurants is vegetarian egg. That is the only vegetarian thing. Unless you go, supposing you come across a Vaishnava dhaba there, you are lucky. See? But anyway, when you go to America, the unmanifest desire, a silent desire, becomes an active desire. A silent attraction becomes an active attraction. A silent temptation becomes an active. That is why exposure takes its toll. Exposure gives you information. Exposure gives you sophistication. Exposure makes you modern. Exposure also creates in you endless number of desires. Exposure. But now the next question is, alright Swamiji, in order not to aggravate one's own desires, the best thing is not avoid exposure. Is it possible? Is avoiding exposure the answer? If exposure can aggravate the desire, then is non-exposure the answer? It looks like as though non-exposure is the answer. It looks so, but how long can you live without exposure? Because living without exposure also is like living living like a frog in the well. You understand? No? Living without any exposure, you will become a Kupastha Manduka. Kupastha Manduka means living in a well, having no exposure. You will have, all your desires will be in the unmanifest state and you will be much more peaceful. Understand? A man without exposure is peaceful. A man in a village is relatively more peaceful. We think they are more enlightened. Aisi baat nahi. They don't have exposure. Understand? They don't have exposure. The moment you give them exposure, they are different. That is why Ramu, when he came to your house, he was simpler. But within the last 2-3 years, what has happened to him? Oh my God, he knows much more than you know. He knows the programs that are available in TV much better than you do. Exposure aggravates desires. And that does not mean avoid exposure and be peaceful. That's not a wrong, right? Therefore, here Krishna says, exposure is choiceless because we have to live exposed. We have to expose ourselves to the world. We have to live our life for which exposure is required. If exposure creates a problem, our reasoning should solve the problem. If exposure creates a problem in the mind, don't say avoiding exposure is the answer. Avoiding exposure is not the answer, even though it can help to up to a point. But merely, we can't really avoid all kinds of exposures. We can't just live. We can't go into some kind of hibernation. We have to live exposed. Therefore, if exposure causes problems, the answer is reasoning. Reasoning is the answer. And reasoning, please understand, does not mean merely arguing. It's not just when you argue with people, it doesn't mean you are very great intellectual. When you argue with yourself, you are an intellectual. Understand? When you are arguing with others, you are only argumentative. Don't use nice language, don't use. Good language, don't use. Oh, I am very logical person. Hey, you are an argumentative person, boss. You are an argumentative person. When you argue with yourself, you are a reasoning person. When you argue with yourself, when you reason with yourself, this reasoning with oneself is the answer. Thus, what happens in this process, exposure and reasoning is the way by which we grow up. That is what Krishna here says. You hear, you see, you hear, you are exposed, and at the same time, you have vairagyam for what you are exposed to. Nirvedam. That nirvedam means, vairagyam. You see things, but you have vairagyam for it. You hear of things, but still you have vairagya. That means you don't fear exposure. You are comfortable with the world. You are comfortable with the objects. Why? Because you are not tempted by them. That's called being comfortable. When you are not tempted, you are comfortable. When you are tempted, you are very uncomfortable. When you are tempted, inert objects, supposing you are tempted for them, you are not comfortable with them. That's why when you go to Khan market, coming back to the topic called the Khan market, when you go there, you are tempted for everything, and therefore you want to buy everything that is available, and then you have already really exhausted whatever money you had taken with you, and then immediately you give a suggestion, let us leave the place quickly, because I want to buy. I'm feeling uncomfortable means what? Whatever I say I want to buy. Therefore, when are you comfortable? When does one become comfortable with the world? When you have no temptations. No temptation. Similarly, when are you comfortable with the other person? You have no temptation for the other person. You have no like for him, dislike for him, anger for him, hatred for him. You look upon him, he is like you, then you are comfortable. With the inert objects, you are comfortable with the inert objects when you know that these objects are also like the objects which I have seen. I have seen so many objects, I have enjoyed so many objects, and these objects are not different from this inference. This is reasoning. You have tasted sea water, it is salty. What you have tasted is so little, what you are yet to taste is so much, What you are yet to taste is so much. The whole sea is still there. And how much you have tasted? Only a few drops. Hey, if you have tasted only a few drops of sea water, and if it is salty, it doesn't quench your thirst, it doesn't help you, then you say maybe the remainder of the sea perhaps is going to help me. No, that is also like this. This is called wisdom. What I am yet to see is not different from what I have seen. You have gone miles ahead in life. What I am yet to see is not different from what I have seen. The pleasures that I am yet to see are not going to be different from what I have seen. For this, Veda says, I want you to hear in Sanskrit. You're all Gita class students, you have less exposure to Vedanta. Therefore, you better hear what Veda says. Your Veda says. This is your scripture is Veda. Your Veda says, Yatha yiha karmachito lokaha kshiyate tatha amutrapi punyachito lokaha kshiyate. Meaning, my dear, just as your pleasures on the earth are non-eternal, your sense pleasures in heaven, when you go there, they are also going to be non-eternal. The heavenly sensory pleasures, the heavenly sense pleasures are not going to be different from the earthly pleasures. Therefore, even when I have enjoyed after enjoying a few earthly pleasures, I should grow out of all the earthly pleasures as well as heavenly pleasures. If I have grown out of the pleasures, the earthly pleasures as well as heavenly pleasures, the sensory pleasures, then my sights come back to myself. That means I am not looking for something in the creation. My attention comes back to myself, understand? It is like, at home, on the day you have nowhere to go, on the day you have nothing to do, on the day you have no homework to do, on the day you have not to meet anybody, on the day you have nothing to do, what happens to your attention? On the day you have not to go to for a picnic also. On the day you have not to go anywhere. What happens to your attention? Comes back to yourself. Because your attention has nowhere else to go but to yourself. Your attention has to come back to yourself when it doesn't go about grazing in the world. Did you get that? When your attention does not go about grazing in the world, what happens to the attention? Similarly, whenever you want to fall asleep, what do? Collect your attention. When your attention comes back to yourself, you are peaceful when you fall asleep. Therefore, here Krishna says, you are most comfortable when you are exposed to the world, you work. And even when you work for money, for survival, you can work for prosperity, for survival. You can work for prosperity, to live a comfortable life, to live a clean life, to live a secure life, to feel good. You don't have to feel all the time some shortage of material thing. Material abundance can coexist with vairagyam. ये बहुत बड़ी बात है जी. You can be rich and yet have vairagya. Did you hear that? You can be rich and yet virakta. Swamiji, you must be joking. How can I be rich and also have vairagya? How can I be? Raja Janak also was an emperor, but he was virakta. If I understand all the money that I have can only support my body, it can't give me what I want, that is vairagyam. It's like thinking, you see, the car can take me from place to place, but it can't liberate me. It can't give me anything beyond taking me from place to place. Money can't give me anything beyond buying a few comforts. House can't give me anything beyond giving me some shelter. In this manner, I can have prosperity, and along with the prosperity, I can also have vairagya. When you have vairagya, you are a happy man. Only money, no vairagyam, one is unhappy. Only vairagyam, no money, then also you are unhappy. What we need is both abundance and wisdom. Abundance and vairagya. In the language of Krishna, what we require is both abundance and, you can just close this thing, What we need is really both, material abundance and vairagya. You are not hearing. What do we need? Both abundance and abundance we get through doing our duty. Duties properly done create abundance. Duties definitely create prosperity, properly done. If everybody does his duty well, definitely prosperity is born. It is only when we don't do our duties, then nothing is, we can't create prosperity. If every member of the family does something or the other, does all his duties, a housewife does her duty, the head of the family does his duty, children do their duty, everybody is doing his duty, everybody has that sense of duty, then prosperity is created. That's necessary for survival. And by studying your scripture, you get vairagya. Scripture creates vairagya, duty creates prosperity, and we require both. Tell me, which can you take and which can you leave? Both we require. Both are necessary. Okay, now the next verse. The verse number 53. Shruti vipratipanna. Now, this is what I wanted to talk about. Exposure, one exposure is exposure to the world. Like you go to America, it's exposure to the world. A villager comes to the city, it's an exposure. Meaning what? He is getting exposed to things which he had never seen. It's exposure. Are you listening? Exposure. In the same manner, when you listen to Karma Kanda means some rituals. That is also a kind of exposure. This is called religious exposure. Exposure to certain religious rituals. When we are exposed to the religious rituals, we come to hear there that if you do this ritual, you will get this material result. That ritual will bring about that material result. They always promise that every ritual has got some material result to give you. Then what happens? The moment you hear these promises, then your dormant desires become active. Karma Kanda makes the dormant desires active. Yes. Karma Kanda makes the dormant desires active. But that again does not mean you should not study Karma Kanda. You should study Karma Kanda, understand what is available, and also use your reasoning to go for what you need. Supposing a person must reason, even if I were to perform all the rituals, and even if I were to get the results for all the rituals, I would still be a searcher, because those pleasures that I am going to get in future are not going to be different from the ones I have already seen. If the pleasures which I have seen haven't made me full, the future pleasures also are not going to make me full. This is reason, this is wisdom. Therefore, wisdom you don't get from outside. Wisdom is the result of your own right thinking. You don't get wisdom from somebody. Even if somebody gives you wisdom, he makes you think correctly, and that very thinking correctly gives you wisdom. Therefore, who is the author of your wisdom? Who is the author of your wisdom? Your own right thinking. Therefore, don't expect, I'm reading Gita and then I'll get wisdom. Hey, yes, Bhagavan makes you think correctly. That is the job of a teacher. A teacher is one who touches your thinking, he guides your thinking. Ultimately, the responsibility of thinking correctly lies with you. ये बहुत जरूरी है. A teacher may say, but the responsibility of following and understanding lies with the student. It is easier to teach than to listen and follow and understand. Responsibility to say what I know is easier, but for a student to listen, follow and understand, that is a greater responsibility. And therefore, when a student follows, definitely he thinks correctly, then as a result of that right thinking, he gets the right knowledge, which is wisdom. Therefore, who is the author of your wisdom? Yourself. You have to. Therefore, who is your light? Yourself. Your own thinking is your light. Your own thinking is your light. Because nobody can guide you. You have to guide yourself. Even to say Bhagavan will guide me from within is also not right. To say that is okay, there is nothing wrong, but ultimately Bhagavan in my heart has to guide my thinking. He has to tell me, that means he has to take me to the scripture, and then I have to be receptive to what the scripture says, and when I think correctly, then I am guiding myself. My thinking definitely, when I am thinking correctly, I am moving all right. If I get my thinking all right, I get my words all right, I get my deeds all right, I get my life all right, I get everything all right. I get my direction all right. Because everything When things go wrong in life, that means what? Things have gone wrong here. Things have gone wrong here. Things get messed up in thinking first. That I can is like Pakistan thinking. We can create violence and take over. We can frighten and take over. We can intimidate and take over. We can bully and take over. What is it? It's a thinking, wrong thinking. That is, and then once you start thinking wrongly, then it comes under law of karma. And once it comes under law of karma, then the law of causation becomes invoked. And the law of causation brings you the result true to your thinking. Yes, the moment I do the action, the law of causation is invoked. That means my actions would bring me results. Therefore, if I can take over by bullying, by violence, etc., you understand? Therefore, in this manner, well, I have exposure to karma kanda, all right. There is nothing wrong in knowing what the karma kanda teaches. We should know the kind of rituals, etc., the worships, but I must also know that the material results that I am going to get for all these rituals are not going to be something different from the pleasures I have had. Because Karmakanda itself says, Veda itself says, the heavenly pleasures are not different from your earthly pleasures. Even if they are different, and yet they are not. In terms of their temporariness, they are the same. What a beautiful statement. What a beautiful statement, you see, that is, every pleasure is different from every other pleasure, and yet all of them have something common. All of them are temporary. All of them are temporary. Pleasures are different. See, every objects, the things taste differently, look differently, sound differently, smell differently. But even though each object has got its own glory, its own way of comforting me, its own way of pleasing me, its own way of helping me indulge in it, but yet ultimately it has to disappear. Temporariness is the destiny of all pleasures. Veda says, hey, in the light of the temporariness of the pleasures, their temporary glories fade out. Their glories fade out in the light of their, like even the glory of one's looks fade out in the light of the temporariness of the body. However good looking you may be the most, maybe a divine looking person, but yet at the end it's nothing. Therefore, that means what? This is exactly how the Shastra helps us learn, you see. You have everything, that is the life, you can have the best that life can give you. You can enjoy the best looks that life can give you. You can enjoy the best shelter that life can give you. You can enjoy the best pleasures that life can give you. That's not the issue. The issue is that you have to understand that they are temporary. That's wisdom. Here Krishna says, Shruti Vipratipanna. Look at the word. Shruti means exposure to karma kanda. Vipratipanna means vikshipta. The mind gets distracted. Whenever you hear a promise, you get excited. This mental excitement is born of promises made by a person or a book. These excitements, uncontainable excitements, are called vipratipanna. Distractions, vikshep. Like supposing, some Swami or somebody, some tantric makes you a promise. You do this japa, then you will become another Karod, the latest Karodpati. Understand? If a slum dog can become a millionaire, you will be a city-bred billionaire. Suppose you do this japa, you will become a city-bred billionaire. Will it excite or not? Yes, it will excite. This excitement born of promises held out by objects and people and even religious books. These excitements are called vipratipanna, shruti vipratipanna. The mind that is excited by hearing, when the mind is excited, when it hears the promises, I am telling you the promises, they may be real promises, but mind gets excited because mind is always receptive to promises made, about the pleasures. Shruti vipratipanna, Krishna says to Arjuna, te, you are. Buddhi. In the second line, there is in the middle of the second line, there is a buddhi connected. Te buddhi, your mind. Shruti vipratipanna, excited, dissipated, distracted, excited, dissipated, distracted, tempted, uncontainably tempted. Your mind that is tempted by the world, your mind that is tempted by the promises made by the karma kanda, etc. Yada, when sthasyati, remains nishchala, without temptation. When it becomes free from temptation. When your tempted mind becomes free from temptation. Are you able to follow? When the mind gets rid of temptation. When the mind, how do you get rid of the temptation? I have already said, what I am being promised in future is not going to be different from what I have already seen in the past. I mean, this is a very big thing. What I am being promised in the future, what I am being promised is not going to be different from what I have already seen. If the pleasures that I have seen are temporary, the pleasures that I am going to see also going to be temporary. Like, a person goes on drinking. In fact, the whiskey that he tasted till yesterday and the whiskey that he is going to taste today, in this evening, it is not at evening, but he is already thinking, this mind starts, thinking about the evening right from the morning. As the morning comes, you start thinking about the evening. Now, the whiskey that he wants to enjoy this evening happens to be Shivaratri, well justified. Therefore, Shivaratri, Bhagavan Shiva also used to take bath. Bhagavan used to take bath. Why can't we have also something similar to that? Therefore, a person is thinking, but he must understand one thing. The whiskey that he is going to have, he wants to have this evening, is not going to be different from the whiskey he has been having it for his whole life. There one has to stop and think. This is not going to be different from what I have seen. Repeat that japa. This is not going to be different from what I have already seen. This is not going to be different from what I have already seen. It's not going to be different. Thus, you have to persuade yourself. Constantly reminding yourself and constantly persuading yourself can slowly make the desire lose its grip over you. That is the only way. This is called vairagya. In that manner, When the mind becomes free from getting tempted by the world, and that is called stasyati nischala, when the mind remains quiet. Mind minus temptation, is it peaceful or disturbed? What is the disturbance? I am using another word. What is the disturbance? When you are tempted, that is disturbance. What else? What is disturbance? What is disturbance and what is tension and what is tension and what is depression? These are all what? Results of temptation. These are all side effects of temptation. What else? When I have temptation and if I don't get what I am tempted for, then I am disturbed, I am depressed, I am angered, I am depressed. Hey, the whole mental life is governed by my fundamental outlook. That is, I think I am looking for something in the future. And another, that is one approach. The other is, what I am going to come across in future is not going to be different from what I have seen. Therefore, no pleasure can make me full. Objects can help me live survival. Beyond survival, they can't give me anything. I repeat, this is the highlight of my classes. I don't dismiss the objects. We should not dismiss. Krishna doesn't dismiss wealth. Krishna is not the right person to dismiss wealth because himself was so wealthy. Himself was so wealthy. Why should he dismiss wealth? He says, have wealth, but have wisdom along with the wealth. Therefore, when a person has no temptation, then where is the disturbance? Disturbance, depression, elation, all these things are side effects of the temptation. What here Krishna says, yada te buddhihi shruti vipratipanna buddhihi yada, when stasyati stays nischala, quiet. When your mind stays without temptation. Samadhau, next slide. And when the mind is not tempted, then there is samadhi. Samadhi means tranquility. Samadhi does not mean, a state of posture, close your eyes. That's not. Samadhi means samahita buddhi. I am giving you the etymological meaning. Etymological meaning, you understand? The very etymological meaning means the very root meaning of the word. Root meaning of the word. It's called etymological meaning. It's called vipatti. Samadhi means samyak adhiyate asminniti samadhi or samahita buddhi, quiet mind, tranquility in your thinking. When there is no storm in the mind, there is only tranquility in the mind, that is samadhi. So minus temptation, there is samadhi, there is tranquility and achala. And the tranquility is maintained by making the mind achala. Achala means you are not only not tempted, you also remove from your mind the reason for temptation. Something, sometimes for a while you are not tempted, all right. But then what you are not tempted for, the temptation that is not there today may come back tomorrow. The temptation that is not there today can come back tomorrow. Does it not happen? The temptation that is not there this year may come back after next few years. But once you remove the reason for the temptation, then there is no temptation. That is really a matured tranquility. It's a tranquility. It's a tranquility born of right thinking. Right thinking choicelessly leads to tranquility. It's not possible to be right in thinking and still be disturbed. Both badi baat hai ji. It is not possible to be right in thinking and still be disturbed. If you are being disturbed, that means you will think there is something wrong in your thinking. If one is disturbed along with the right thinking, then where do we go for the answer? Despite the right thinking, if I have a problem, then where is the answer? I can never find the answer. Because all answers we find in life in our right thinking. Nowhere else. Don't think we find answers merely in abundance. No, abundance itself causes problems which I have to resolve in my thinking. Money causes problems which I have to solve in my thinking. I have to think correctly to cut money also to size. If I don't cut money to size, money will cut me to size. Yes. And therefore, right thinking definitely leads to tranquility. That is why Bhagavan says, Samadhau achala buddhi tada. Then, when your mind is free from temptation and thus free from disturbance and thus tranquil and thus unnegatably, undisturbably tranquil, tada, then yogam avapsasi, it means that is what is called yoga. You have already reached a state of yoga. He is defining what is yoga. Yoga is not an action. Yoga is thinking correctly, making yourself, preparing yourself for understanding the truth. Because in a tranquil, when I am peaceful, I can register my nature. I can understand how I am not a form, but how I am the source of the entire form, how I am not a given thought, but the source of the entire mind. I am not a given part, I am not one of the details of the creation, but I am the common truth of all the creation. This teaching as given by Vedanta, I can understand this teaching when I am mentally tranquil, peaceful, and I can be peaceful only when I am not having illusions, and that is when I am, if I am searching for, if I am not searching for something in future, if I am not searching for happiness through the objects, then definitely I am tranquil, and when I am tranquil, I can register the truth. Vairagyam is the means to mental tranquility. Vairagyam does not mean just absence of abundance. Is Vairagyam physical or mental? Is Vairagyam physical or mental? Vairagyam is wisdom. Vairagyam is not poverty. If poverty means Vairagyam, then every poor man should have Vairagyam. Vairagyam is the atmosphere in which we study the Shastra. Clear? Thus now I am going to sum up the verse, then we go to the next verse. When, despite exposure, we should not fear exposure, we should not fear exposure, we should not fear exposure to the world, we should not fear exposure to the scriptures, we should not fear exposure to anything. Fear of exposure should be gone in life. Fear of exposure should not be there. I don't believe, Shastra doesn't believe. That is why we say, Bhadram Karnebi Shunyama Devaha. A love for exposure is the essence of this mantra. You understand, no? Bhadram. I'll repeat. Bhadram Karnebi Shunyama Devaha. Bhadram Pashe Makshatirya Jatraha. Sthirai Rangai Istushtuva Gamsastanovi Vishema Devahitam Yadayu. Just 2 lines and on. Now you see, may we hear everything that comes from Him. May we hear all things, that all good things coming from Him in every direction. May we have exposure to everything. May we have exposure to all good things to be seen. May we have exposure to all the right teachings. Meaning what? May we have exposure to the whole God's creation. And then may we have exposure to God's creation and learn from it how to live a healthy life with strong limbs for 100 years. The love to live, the love for exposure, and the love to learn. And the learning must culminate in Vairag. That means you are hearing. A clear proof that you are hearing. We must have the love for exposure and love for reasoning, love for learning, not just to be swept away by the creation. Love for exposure, love for learning, and ultimately love for Vairagyam. And Vairagyam is not an end. Vairagyam is what helps you understand the great teaching given by Vedanta, that is Atma is Brahman. You are not a form. You are the truth of all forms. The way we told, you are not a given form. You are the truth of all forms. As water, you are the soul of every wave. As the water, you are the soul of all bubbles. As the water, you are the whole ocean. Is not water the content of the ocean? Is not water the whole substance of the ocean? In that manner, here Shastra says, he is not the seer, the content of the whole creation. He is not the dreamer, the truth of the whole that is dreamt. Thus this teaching, which is the crux of Vedic culture, this teaching of the self as the truth, which is the crux of the Vedic culture, we have to prepare ourselves to understand. Life should be lived in order to prepare ourselves to understand the truth which is taught by the culture. The truth that is taught by our scripture. And therefore, what can prepare us for that is Vairagyam. For that does not mean, Vairagyam does not mean in poverty. Do your duties, live a comfortable life, but live a life of study, live a life of prayer. Prayers must coexist with our prosperity, and worship must coexist with our prosperity, and duties must coexist with our prosperity, and Vairagyam must coexist with your prosperity, and studying scriptures must coexist with your prosperity, and thus becoming really an educated spiritual, both of them, and also comfortable. You are comfortable, educated, and you are also wise. This is all, I am putting it in different words, but the Shastra puts it in 4 words. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. What can you leave out of the 4 and what can you take? Artha is choice, prosperity is choiceless. Kama, using it for your meeting your needs is choiceless. Dharma, living a life of values is choiceless for mental peace. And moksha, and then understanding our own scripture is choiceless. These are the 4 choiceless goals of life. They are not the choiceless goals of idiots. Don't think like that. They are the choiceless goals of every thinking individual. It may be a human being, or it may be some other individual somewhere out there, somewhere. But anybody, when it comes to animals who can't think, Artha and Kama, when it comes to the individuals who can think, they are Artha, Kama, Dharma and Moksha. These are the 4 Purusharthas. Clear? Thus Bhagavan has conveyed this message. The next verse, let us begin. Now, We are changing the topic. You will be able to hear for another 5-6 minutes. You know, we always have this doubt in our mind. In life, you know, sometimes we get doubts. Sometimes we get doubts which make sense. Sometimes we get doubts which don't make sense really. Sometimes we start doubting because we don't think. Sometimes we get doubts because we start thinking. One is a non-thinking born doubt. The other is a thinking born doubt. Is it not true? Sometimes we get doubt because we don't think. If we had thought a little, there would not have been that doubt. थोड़ा सोचता वो डाउट नहीं होता. वो थोड़ा भी नहीं सोचा तो डाउट आ गया. But then sometimes when we think, we get some logical doubts which we need to ask. Here is a doubt, a universal doubt, universal curiosity, universal doubt. That is, how does a Brahmajnani live? How does he think? What does he think? What does a Brahmajnani think? What does he eat? What does he drink? How does he sleep? How does he live? What is his lifestyle? A Brahmajnani's lifestyle. What does he think? How does he live? This is a curiosity. In fact, this particular doubt itself is not that important. You know, I'm going to make you think a little deep, I will not allow you just, like that. What is important? Supposing when you want to fall asleep, listen, when you fall asleep, when you want to go to sleep, when you want to fall asleep, what is your curiosity? Do you have a curiosity as to what to do after falling asleep? Do you have a curiosity to find? No. The dhyanam, the effort is always to fall asleep where I don't have to do anything. In fact, sleep itself is a state where I don't have to do anything, where I don't have to desire anything, where I don't miss anything. I want to go to a state where I miss nothing, I crave for nothing. Is not sleep a state of missing nothing and craving for nothing? That is a state where we miss nothing, we crave nothing. That means what? Freedom from lack and desire. Freedom from lack and desire at once experienced in sleep. Is it not? Freedom from lack. There is no lack. You don't feel a lack. And a lack unfelt, don't posit it to be there. A lack unfelt, don't read it to be there. Are you able to follow? A lack not felt, don't say even though I don't feel the lack there, but it is there, don't say that. A lack not felt is non-existent. You have to hear. A lack not felt is non-existent. Therefore, in deep sleep, there is no lack felt. Therefore, there is no craving felt. He is not a state of your free nature. There is nothing else. It is not that you are experiencing something other than you. You are free from everything and just to be full. You are in a state of, you remain yourself free from lack and free from craving. Is it a belief? Is deep sleep state a belief or experience? You have to say it with great reflection. That you are here in Ramana Kendra now, is it your belief or experience? Belief is something which is subject to correction, subject to doubt. Like, is there heaven or not? That's a belief. After leaving the body, I may go to heaven. What is it? It's a belief. The one who says there is heaven, he is a believer, and the one who says there is no heaven, he is also a believer. A disbeliever also is a believer. One believes there is heaven, another believes there is no heaven. There is no proof. You can't verify it. Is deep sleep to be verified, or it is obvious? Dream. That you have dreams is what? Obvious. It's not a belief. That sometimes you go to sleep in which there are no dreams. A dreamless sleep. That is also obvious. It's not a belief. Now listen. Freedom from lack and craving is also obvious, not a belief. If it is not a belief, and yet if you got a doubt, that is called experience, that is there. You are experiencing freedom from both lack and craving. In sleep, we are free from both lack and craving. Therefore, when a person tries to fall asleep, what is his main target? To fall asleep or to find out what to do after that? Shastra also says, a student's anxiety, a student's inner drive should be to figure out what the truth is, not being worried about what happens after knowing the truth. After knowing the truth, the search comes to an end. The search comes to an end. The anxiety comes to an end. The curiosity comes to an end. The uncertainty comes to an end. All that I fear comes to an end. All that I fear comes to an end. Like the moment I fall asleep, all that I fear in the waking state comes to an end. Similarly, just as sleep is the answer, sleep is not a means to another goal, is the answer. Sleep is the answer. Sleep is nothing but oneself. Going back to oneself is the answer. Similarly, understanding that self is the answer. Even though a real student is one who always becomes interested to find out what the truth is. But then sometimes even the brilliant people do become curious, and then they get into some mystical questions. Even the brilliant people do become mystical. Mysticism does tempt even the most reasoning. बहुत बड़ी बात है जी. Even the most reasoning, they become mystical sometimes. Like a person, now I'm concluding, we'll continue it later. Like a person who knows that mala is nothing but just keep you awake when you are doing japa. It is just to keep you awake. It's a very elementary method by which you can be, supposing you are doing like this beats, you are rotating, so that this act of rotating keeps you awake. Otherwise, as you sit down and then close your eyes and you fall asleep. When you want to fall asleep, you take the whole night to fall asleep. But when you sit in meditation, you fall asleep. But even though that's all the mala, there is nothing else in it. But yet we become mystical. Maybe if I put it on and then big Rudraksha, vagera, we mystify it so much, it has become, I tell you, multi-billion dollar mala. I used to get mala for 5 rupees. When I went to Rishikesh, 40 years ago, I used to get mala for 5 rupees, 2 rupees, 3 rupees. Now, a good mala is 20,000 rupees. 15,000 rupees. And what do you do? Same Om Namah Shivaya anyway. It is the same Om Namah Shivaya. What I am telling is, we mystify things. But anyway, here is a student who says, what happens after Brahmajnana? How does a Brahmajnani live? So his curiosity is not for the truth, his curiosity is for the lifestyle of a Jnani. And Krishna doesn't dismiss the question. Krishna answers the question, and it is very useful also. There is a certain logic about it, which we will see in the coming class. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vajishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namah. Hari Om Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Hari Om Hari Om.